Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. We continue here. The national dialogue process is entering a critical phase as the nomination of sectoral representatives to its steering committee has been completed. According to the Presidency, 26 sectors have submitted nominees, marking a major step towards the establishment of the committee that will drive the next phase of public consultations. We are joined now by Anzio Jacobs, who's the National Dialogue spokesperson. Anzio, good to have you on the program this afternoon. So the nomination process for the steering committee has been completed, as mentioned. Can you give us some insight into the caliber, but also the diversity of the nominees submitted by the 26 sectors?
Good afternoon, Nhlanhla, and thank you for having me. Indeed, it's been quite a process to date. You will recall that during the National Dialogue Convention, there was an intention to have 22 sectors represented. But the feedback that we got during the convention was that there were some sectors that still needed to be brought to the table, and that slowed down our process somewhat. But in slowing down the process, what we've managed to do is to ensure that all of the sectors that were identified during the convention phase have been pulled together, that the nominees of those sectors have been put forward. And so now of the nominees that have been put forward, the process that we've been going through is just doing a review to ensure that there's balance across the country, that those sectoral representatives indicate the makeup of the country and the 9 provinces. We've been quite adamant about a gender split, as was the request. And we did want to make sure that voices, young and old, are heard at that table. And so this is the process that has taken quite some time, but has come together as the steering committee. We're now in the final phases of onboarding them.
Yeah. The Eminent Persons Group is now reviewing the nominees. Let's speak about this. What are the key criteria that will be used, especially as you assess and recommend final appointments to the President?
So, of course, one of the things that we have to figure out is whether they are, in fact, indicative of the representation that their sectoral clusters want. And so what has taken us a little bit more time is to go back and have sectoral consults. In those sectoral consults, there has been some voting that has taken place to indicate the sectoral representatives, and those are the names that have been put forward in the first instance. Yeah. In the second, there is the due diligence that needs to be done. The makeup of the steering committee is quite important as it will lead the national dialogue process. And so we have to do some checks on all of those that are part of the process. But again, we're wanting to balance and ensure that each of the provinces are represented, that there is gender representativity, that there's age representativity. You'll have noticed during the convention, there was a specific call for representation of persons with disability and that their voices be heard. And so those are the types of preparations that have been underway to ensure that when they come on board, that they are reflective of those criteria, but also more broadly reflective of a South African society.
One of the aims of the steering committee is to oversee nationwide public dialogues. What will these dialogues then look like in practice? Are we talking town halls, workshops, or more formal policy discussions?
So there are 3 kinds of dialogues that there's provision for. So the first kind of dialogue is a citizen-led dialogue. These are dialogues that are made up of between 20 and 1,000 citizens. They can take place in any format as decided by the group that is convening. And really here what we're wanting to do is hear broad-reaching themes coming from ordinary South Africans about what they think is most critical to discuss. The second level of the dialogue is the ward-based dialogue, and this is to ensure that there's broad coverage, that everybody finds themselves in a ward across the country. And in instances, for example, where the wards are slightly larger, there's been some careful attention paid to whether there can be more of those ward dialogues per ward to ensure that those that are living a bit further away are not prejudiced by the size of the wards. Then, of course, there are sectoral dialogues or thematic dialogues, and that's where the dialogues are being consolidated in many instances. We're looking for thematics that are cross-cutting and overlapping or intersecting. And really here, what we're trying to do is the citizen-led dialogue allows individuals to engage about subjects that may not have found their ways into the thematics more broadly. In the second layer, we're ensuring that everybody in the country has some level of coverage. In the third layer, what we're trying to do is to synthesize some of those issues and look at more specifically what can be done, what the suggestions of ordinary South Africans are to fix some of the problems that we've been plagued with as South Africa. So those are the three modalities. In addition to this, the dialogue will be broadcast on community radio. It will be using the South African broadcaster as well to ensure its wide publicity. And then there's an app that overlays that. Now, we've thought about these various modalities to make sure that every citizen, regardless of where they are, has an opportunity to interface with this process. And then finally, but perhaps quite importantly, the national dialogue process will include children and young people in particular. Children and young people make up a significant amount of the populace, and so there's a desire to have a national school dialogue day, and this is part of the planning that is being done and what we envision as part of the roadmap to get everyone involved.
Anzio, given that some foundations and political parties withdrew from the earlier stages of the process, how is this dialogue team then working to restore trust, but also to ensure inclusive participation going forward?
I think it was a crucial part of this phase of the project that they were re-engaged. Indeed, the Eminent Persons Group did make their way to those foundations and have engaged them quite exhaustively. And the intention is always to bring people closer rather than further apart from one another. So there's been a consistent engagement with those foundation groups. And I think, as you've mentioned, they were really removing themselves from the first phase. But it seems that there is a desire and an appetite to continue to engage in the dialogue process, as there's a view that it is an important process to follow.
The President describes this as a pivotal stage as well. What makes this moment so crucial then in the overall roadmap to the national dialogue?
I think what makes this crucial is that we're really here trying to see that the modality works, that we can actually pilot in this phase, check the facilitation, the toolkit, to ensure that the arms of the national dialogue process, the interministerial committee, the eminent persons group, the secretariat, as well as the steering committee are all aligned with one another and prepared for what is to be rolled out next. Indeed, what we're trying to do is to pilot the facilitation modalities in particular. We're trying to see if citizen-led dialogues in the way that they've been envisioned will work, so that these things are troubleshot ahead of the broader national rollout, which is forthcoming hereafter. Also, what we're trying to do in this phase is to ensure that operational issues are sorted out, so that the ops center, for example, that people would be able to call into for troubleshooting is up and running, that our partnerships between entities like UNISA and others who are willing to provide us with venues are sound. We're looking at doing some of the education work, the civic education at this point. So really what this phase of the project does is that it launches the national dialogue in such a way that ordinary citizens are now able to take hold of it and actually engage in the process. There has been a bit of teething pain in the sense that we're a bit slower than what we'd initially envisioned for the rollout of the dialogue, but this is not to say that any work has stopped. Indeed, there's been a lot of work in the background trying to ensure that that framework is sound for the major rollout, which will begin early next year.
Anzio, what do you say to people or organizations who call this national dialogue a waste of time or money, or hard-earned taxpayers' money as well? What's your response in this regard?
I think that it's unfortunate, when people are in a position where they are often able to speak and have their opinions and voices heard, they forget sometimes that this is not the universal experience of South Africans across the board. And so it would be remiss of us to say that this is a useless endeavor, that it's a waste of time and resources. Ordinary South Africans generally have been taking to the streets to have their issues heard, to be seen and visible as part of processes where national decision-making is happening. And so what you see in the ambition or the desire of the national dialogue process is an opportunity where South Africans can come together and be heard in a process that is making decisions about them with them.
But many South Africans may feel a bit disconnected or skeptical about the impact of these dialogues. Maybe then how do we plan to bridge this gap between high-level processes and everyday citizen concerns?
So there's a portion of the roadmap that is earmarked and kind of discussed as a rapid response segment of the work that is being done. So just to explain, as the dialogue is taking off, as the pilot sessions are happening, as the toolkit is being rolled out, the idea is to have the interministerial committee make use of what we're calling rapid response. And the idea behind the rapid response segment of the work is to ensure that where there's an opportunity to do so, that the things that are quick wins are done quickly and responsively as they are being lifted. So I use the example often that if a street light is out, it shouldn't take 3 or 4 months to remedy it, but instead it should take a few days. And so the intention is that as the issues are being lifted, where there is issues that are easy to deal with and quicker to deal with, that those are dealt with most urgently and quickly, so that South Africans can start to see the process work instead of waiting for a longer term where the bigger challenges may take a bit more time. The ones that are more immediate should be resolved in a quicker fashion.
The EPG, the Interministerial Committee as well, and the Presidency are still custodians of this process for now. Let's speak about this. How is the coordination between these bodies being managed to ensure efficacy and transparency as well?
So the role of the head of state is as convener of this process, and I think that it's quite important to highlight that the convener of the process is not involved in the day-to-day. The eminent persons group is the custodian body of the process at the moment, and this anticipating the incoming steering committee. But the day-to-day running of the national dialogue is still within the purview of the Secretariat, so NEDLAC. NEDLAC is responsible to ensure that the incoming steering committee are seated, that they are appropriately equipped for the tasks that lay ahead of them, and that they are convened in such a way that they are able to liaise with one another and understand the process in a more intimate way. The eminent persons group has always been established as the guarantors of the process, and so really they are meant to oversee that the process is run well, that it is running in a fashion that's consistent with the ambitions of the national dialogue, and that there is accountability through that framework. So theirs is an oversight process, and then the steering committee is the day-to-day kind of coordinator of the work.
Yeah. Anzio, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that the outcomes of the dialogue process, once public consultations are complete, actually translate into policy or tangible change?
So the idea is to lift from a wide range of discussions, various outcomes that have come from the discussions across the country at a ward level, the citizen level, etc. The idea then is to synthesize those into overarching issues, but with the layer of rapid response over that. So we're not only looking for the overarching issues, but dealing with smaller issues as and when they come about. And ultimately what we want is a roadmap for the next 30 years. That would be the ideal ambition in this process. And so that's really where the second convention comes in. Those that are then invited into the second convention after having participated in the national dialogue process will then have to make a pronouncement over how we move the process forward. Of course, there are a series of modalities through which we can do that. The process could be moved forward through the national dialogue being consolidated into an outcome document that could then guide us. But if it's not the outcome document, ordinary South Africans would be able to then speak into the process and decide what they would like instead. The convention would be the moment to do that. The convention would be the moment where those decisions are made and where they will ultimately become binding in the process with all parties sitting at the table.
Yeah. And finally, as the next phase begins, what does success then look like to you, both in the short term for the steering committee, but also in the long term for the national dialogue's impact on South Africa?
I think on this one, I'll have to answer in my individual capacity. So for me, success would look like a coherent steering committee where all of those sectors are well represented and able to have voice. For me, success in the pilot phase will look like the successful sharing of the facilitation models and toolkits such that ordinary South Africans can get their hands on them and actually engage with the process in a meaningful way. And success here would look like us being able to at least sample the districts and ward discussions such that we can see, especially in areas that are hard to reach, whether this modality is sound for those that do not have access to technology, for those that may not necessarily want this modality of engaging, and for those that will be taking up the citizen dialogues. I certainly hope success will be marked by more South Africans being actively engaged in this process. Again, not to identify what our issues are, we know what those are, but rather to co-craft solutions for South Africa.
Mr. Anzio Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on this next chapter in South Africa's national dialogue. Of course, as the process moves into a critical implementation phase, we will be watching quite closely to see how inclusive, transparent and impactful it provides to be. We do appreciate your time and insight on this issue.